Good morning. Today we're beginning chapter 11, which focuses on life on the job and the rewards that come from working. This is the first of two chapters examining the day-to-day reality of work. This chapter looks at the positive aspects, while the next chapter will examine the challenges and difficulties. Landing a new job is usually a pleasant experience. Feels good to know you're wanted, even when all that's expected is performing routine duties for a modest wage. The psychological boost from being hired may persist for many years when the job serves as an important source of self esteem and the workplace becomes a site for individual fulfillment. The workplace can also serve as a kind of school where new abilities and skills are developed, as well as a social club from which to draw friends and acquaintances. But in different circumstances, work can be an unending source of misery, filled with danger, alienation, and stress. Today, we'll focus on the positive aspects, the rewards of employment, beginning with simply being employed rather than unemployed. Unemployment is a major contributor to persistent poverty and income inequality. As we discuss in Chapter 10, the unemployment rate is one of the most closely watched economic statistics because it strongly affects both individuals and society as a whole. During times of job abundance, the poverty rate declines significantly. When people have jobs, they have income, which lifts them out of poverty. Low unemployment also narrows the income gap between different segments of society. When labor markets are tight and workers are in demand, employers must compete for workers by raising wages, which particularly benefits those at the lower end of the wage scale. The unemployment rate is an important statistic, but as we'll see, it's more complicated than it might first appear. During the opening years of this century, the official unemployment rate ranged from a low of 4% in 2000 to a high of 6% in 2003. Following the onset of the Great Recession at the end of 2007 and the beginning of 2008, the unemployment rate climbed sharply, reducing 9.6% toward the end of 2010. The economy gradually recovered, and by 2019, the unemployment rate had fallen below 4%, with the economy experiencing strong growth before COVID. However, the COVID-19 pandemic caused an unprecedented shock to the labor market in the second quarter of 2020. Unemployment averaged 20.6 million people, and the unemployment rate spiked to 13%, the highest quarterly average ever recorded in the history of the series, which goes back to 1948. This far exceeded the peak reached during the Great Recession when unemployment hit 15.2 million in the fourth quarter of 2009. The recovery from COVID-19 proved remarkably swift. By the fourth quarter of 22, the unemployment rate had returned to its pre-pandemic level of 3.6%. The unemployment rate remained below 4% from February 22 through December 23, ranging between 3.4 and 3.9%. In 2023, the unemployment rate was 3.64%, and it rose slightly to 4.1% by the fourth quarter of 2024. This recovery stands in stark contrast to the Great Recession of 2008. In the fall of 2020, forecasters had expected unemployment to stay above 6% through 2021, yet the economy achieved what many thought impossible, a soft landing with robust growth, low unemployment, and inflation approaching the Fed Reserve price stability target. The unemployment rate is an estimate subject to a number of qualifications that we need to understand. First, it's a relative percentage. It measures those unemployed compared to the total labor force, not to the total population. Size matters because the unemployment rate can change, not just because the number of unemployed people changes, but because the size of the labor force itself changes. So what constitutes the labor force? Well, the labor force is officially defined as consisting of all non-institutionalized men and women over the age of 16 who are either working for pay or unemployed and actively seeking work. Notice what this definition excludes. It excludes imprisoned and institutionalized individuals. In 2008, federal and state prisons and local jails held 2.31 million men and women at the system's peak, the great majority of working age. However, the picture has changed significantly since then. Following over a decade of decarceration, the prison and jail population declined, with a 2008 peak of 2.3 million to 1.7 million in 2020, driven largely by the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on the criminal legal system. As of 2021, nearly 2 million people were incarcerated in state or federal prisons and local jails, though by spring 2024, roughly 1.3 million people were being held in federal and state prisons, with around 660,000 in local jails, for a total of approximately 1.8 million, down 12% from 2019. However, pandemic-era decarceration has stalled, with 40 states increasing the number of people in their prisons between 24 and 22. The exclusion of these individuals from the officially defined labor force reduces the official unemployment rate. The labor force definition also excludes those not actively seeking work. Actively seeking work is defined as having engaged in specific job search activities, such as answering want ads, registering with employment agencies, or submitting applications within the past 4 weeks. This means that discouraged workers, those who have given up looking for work because they believe no jobs are available for them, are not counted as unemployed, further understanding the true extent of joblessness in the economy. Another major qualification is the employment rate does not take into account the distinction between full-time and part-time employment. As far as the government statistics are concerned, employment means at least 15 hours of work per week. That's it, just 15 hours. That means somebody working only 15 hours per week, earning minimum wage, is counted the same as someone working 40 or 50 hours a week at a good salary. An apparently robust employment picture may therefore obscure a fair degree of underemployment where workers who want full-time jobs have to settle for part-time work. This distinction becomes particularly important during economic downturns when employers cut hours rather than laying off workers entirely, or when people can only find part-time positions even though they need full-time employment to make ends meet. The unemployment rate is a snapshot. It is a picture. It captures employment status at a particular moment in time. It does not make distinctions regarding the duration of employment. Someone who happened to have a job when surveyed but was unemployed at other times is counted as employed, just like someone who worked steadily all year. The rate also does not take into account workers in the underground economy or shadow economy. This includes illegal work like drug dealing, prostitution, and bookmaking, but also a considerable amount of legitimate work done off the books: repair work, gardening, personal services done on a cash-only basis to avoid taxes. Recent analysis estimates the global shadow economy at 11.8% of GDP, valued at approximately $12.5 trillion. However, there's substantial variation across regions. In North America, the shadow economy represents just 5% of the GDP, the lowest share globally, yet the U.S. shadow economy alone is worth approximately $1.4 trillion, making it the second highest in absolute value worldwide. Among advanced OECD countries, whereas in the US, Switzerland, Australia, Japan, and New Zealand, the shadow economy is 10% or less of the official GDP, in Eastern Europe and Southern European countries, Greece, Italy, Portugal, and Spain, it reaches 20% or more. For 36 European and OECD countries, the average size of the shadow economy decreased from 16.48% of GDP in 2020 to 16.7% in 2021, with forecasts showing continued modest reductions. At the state level in the U.S., the average size of the shadow economy is estimated at 13% of GDP, with significant variation, from a high of 21% in Georgia to a low of 5% in Wyoming. Some argue that the official rate understates the extent of unemployment because it doesn't count discouraged workers, jobless people who have stop looking for work because they despair of ever finding any. Discouraged workers are persons who are not in the labor force, want and available for work, and have looked for a job sometime in the prior 12 months, but are not counted as unemployed because they had not searched for work in the prior 4 weeks, specifically because they believe no jobs are available to them. In August 2024, the number of discouraged workers changed little at 514,000, and nationwide in 2024 there were 1.56 million people marginally attached to the workforce, of which discouraged workers are a subset. The impact varies by state. In California, for example, discouraged workers account for 25% of the marginally attached population in 2024. At the national level, the difference between the unemployment and the official unemployment rate and the rate including discouraged workers was 0.3 percentage points in 2024, indicating that while discouraged workers don't constitute 40% of the official unemployment, as earlier estimates suggest, they still represent a meaningful hidden component of labor market slack. Unemployment rates are cold statistics, but they signify harsh realities for individual men and women who experience prolonged joblessness. Extended periods of unemployment can lead to financial ruin. For many, the loss of a wage or salary result in an inability to pay bills, potential loss of housing, and mounting debt. Job loss usually results in a loss of work-related benefits, particularly health insurance. Terminated employees can maintain their policies for a fixed period by paying a monthly fee through COBRA, but this adds considerably to financial stress during unemployment. Beyond financial impacts, unemployment takes a severe psychological toll. Many psychological problems have been directly tied to joblessness, including stress and diminished satisfaction with one's life. Even unemployed workers in Western Europe who were buffered from financial pressures by generous state payments were found to be much less satisfied with their lives than people with jobs. Unemployment also poses physical risk to someone's health. The health consequences of job loss are severe and well documented. Research by Gallo and colleagues found that job loss doubles the risk of heart attacks and stroke among older workers. Specifically, involuntary job loss among older workers more than doubles the risk of subsequent stroke, and this estimated effect persisted despite adjustments for potential risk factors that might confound the relationship. A U.S. study investigating several thousand people aged 50 and over a 10-year period showed that when other cardiovascular risk factors were controlled for, the risk of a heart attack increased more than twofold, and stroke risk increased more than twofold after involuntary job loss when compared to those still employed. Research by Sullivan and von Wachter found a 50 to 100% increase in mortality the year following displacement and a 10 to 15% increase in mortality rates persisting long term. The consequences are remarkably persistent. These elevated death rates continued for decades after the initial job loss. Large-scale meta-analysis and systemic reviews have showed that the long-term unemployed have at least twofold risk of mental illness, particularly depression and anxiety disorders, compared to employed persons, and the mortality is 1.6-fold higher. The mechanisms include multiple pathways. Unemployed individuals tend to suffer more from stress-related illnesses, such as high blood pressure, stroke, heart attack, heart disease, and arthritis. Additionally, unemployment influences health through chronic stress, reduced social interaction, decreased self-esteem, increased prevalence of smoking, drinking, and physical inactivity, all contributing to higher cholesterol, elevated blood pressure, weight gain, which also increase risk of diabetes and heart attacks. Now let's shift from unemployment to look at varieties of employment. Significant changes in employment and labor force participation emerge when we break down the labor force by gender and age groups over different time periods. For women, participation has increased across all age categories since the 1970s. This reflects major social change, including women's increased educational attainment, changing social norms about women working, and the economic necessity for two-income households. As of 2024, prime age women participation rate reached a historic high of 78.1%, while overall women's participation stood at 57.5%. In contrast, men's overall labor force participation has declined over recent decades, though the patterns vary by age group. For men 55 to 64, the participation rate was 68.7% in 2004, rose to 69.9% in 2014, and reached 71.6% by 2024. For men 65 and older, the rate was 23.4% in 2024, representing a significant increase from the historic lows of the 1990s when it had fallen to around 17%. What explains these trends for older workers? Several factors continue to shape participation. Increases in Social Security and pension payments made retirement financially feasible for more people during the late 20th century, though more recent policy changes have encouraged longer work lives. Ill health forces some older workers to retire. However, participation rates for older workers have been rising in the 21st century, with projections showing the 55 to 64 age group reaching 68.6% by 2034 and the 65 to 74 age group reaching 29.6%. These increases reflect changing retirement policies, economic necessity, improved health among older Americans, and shifts in the nature of work that allow more older individuals to continue employment. Part-time work is common among both retirees and younger workers. A work week of fewer than 35 hours is the threshold the U.S. Department of Labor uses to differentiate part-time from full-time employment. The number of part-time workers remains sizable. In August 2025, approximately 29 million employees were part-timers. As of July 2025, part-time workers made up 17.4% of total employment. There are notable gender differences in part-time work. In 2023, 22.5% of women worked part-time compared to 11.7% of men. Part-time work is appealing to some workers who want to spend more time with their families, continue their education, or pursue hobbies and leisure activities. However, family influence works both ways. Many employers have not been part-timers by choice. Employees have not been part-timers by choice and would prefer full-time jobs if they could find them. These workers are classified as working part-time for economic reasons or involuntary part-time workers. As of June 2023, approximately 4.2 million people were employed part-time for economic reasons beyond their control. While this represents a significant concern, the number of involuntary part-time workers has fluctuated with economic conditions, spiking during recessions and declining during recoveries. Part-time work resulted in lower pay both absolutely and per hour work. Because women are more likely than men to work part-time, the gender earnings ratio widens to 78.1% when all workers, both full and part-time, are included, compared to a smaller gap when only looking at full-time workers. Part-timers of both genders are also less likely to be covered by employer-sponsored pensions and health insurance. Another category of employees are temporary workers who can either be full or part-time. The U.S. Department of Labor refers to them as contingent workers because their employment is not open-ended but contingent on a contract or an agreement covering a limited time period. In July 2023, 6.9 million workers, 4.3% of total employment, held contingent jobs, representing an increase from 3.8% in 2017. Contingent jobs are those that people do not expect to last or that are temporary, without an implicit or explicit contract for ongoing employment. By industry, contingent rates were highest in agriculture and related industries at 10.4%, and in leisure and hospitality at 7.7%. By occupation, contingent rates were highest in natural resources, construction, and maintenance occupations at 6.5%, and in service occupations at 6.1%. Education and health services also employ significant numbers of contingent workers. Contingent workers remain prominent in the high-tech sector, working as software development, system programmers, and technical writers. Unlike many other contingent workers, these technical contractors are usually well paid and have considerable on-the-job autonomy and flexibility. More typical of the contingent workforce or workers employed by temporary help agencies. In July 2023, there were 945,000 temporary help agency workers, representing 0.6% of total employment. During the course of just 1 week, around 3 million temporary or contract employees worked for staffing agencies across the U.S. These workers perform a range of tasks from routine office work to specialized positions in healthcare, education, and light industrial sectors. In May 2017, more than half, 55%, of contingent workers would have preferred a permanent job, while 1/3 said they preferred their contingent employer arrangement. Being a contingent worker comes with significant drawbacks in terms of wages, benefits, and job security, which we'll examine more closely in the next chapter. To be an officially designated member of the labor force requires receiving a wage or salary for work performed. This results in an exclusion of large numbers of individuals who receive no pay for their work. The largest category of such workers comprises full-time homemakers, predominantly women, who are not paid for all they do at home. But housework is work nonetheless, and attempts have been made to compute its monetary value. Another large set of workers consists of volunteers of every description. Volunteer activities include fundraising, coaching, athletic teams, and refereeing games, tutoring, preparing and serving food, and doing physical labor like tree planting and building repair. There are several advantages to volunteer work. It provides routine structure and purpose to one's time. It offers social connections and roles, allowing people to build relationships and contribute to their communities. Volunteers report greater well-being and life satisfaction. According to a Cornell University study, volunteering provided routines, social connections, and social roles that resulted in older volunteers exhibiting greater psychological and physical well-being than other retirees. Although benefits were most apparent among retirees at upper education and income levels, volunteering was also associated with greater well-being for volunteers with low incomes and poor health. A great deal of work-related learning tasks take place on the job rather than in formal educational settings. According to one estimate, as much as 1/3 to 1/2 of the development of job-related skills takes place after an individual leaves school. This provides upwards of 1/3 to 1/2 of skill development for most workers. Chapter 7 took a somewhat skeptical stance regarding the relevance of formal education to subsequent job performance. Implicit in that view is an assumption that much work-related learning occurs while actually doing the work. This is a reasonable assumption based on evidence. Half of all German high school students participate in apprenticeship programs that combine formal education and paid work. This is a massive commitment by German society to vocational training. Students attend school part of the time and work in actual companies the rest of the time, learning their chosen trade under supervision of experienced workers. After completing an apprenticeship, which typically lasts 2 to 3 years, student skills are certified through examinations administered by employers' representatives and the relevant labor unions. This joint involvement of employers and unions ensures that standards are high and widely recognized. Successful completion of an apprenticeship program results in higher starting wages than found in most other industrial nations. Young German workers who've completed apprenticeships can expect to start their careers earning substantially more than their counterparts in countries without such comprehensive training system. But the system requires early selection of an occupation. Students must choose what could be a lifelong occupation at a relatively young age, a rather daunting prospect for any young man or woman. This early tracking has been criticized for emphasizing specialized industrial skills that may be of declining relevance in mature service-oriented economies. Training in the U.S. is a mix of formal and informal mechanisms. Some employers offer formal training programs, particularly larger companies, and those in industries requiring specialized skills. These might include classroom instruction, structured on-the-job training, or a combination of both. When training programs are absent or insufficient, there's still the opportunity for learning by doing. This informal learning is a fundamental part of most jobs. Even when employer-sponsored training is lacking or absent, workers often learn quite a lot through informal means. A large part consists of learning by doing, which by its nature entails making mistakes. But learning from mistakes can be the basis of some of life's most useful and enduring lessons. Also, coworkers serve as an important source of expertise regarding the technical features of a job. Their presence can be invaluable when they serve as interpreters and exponents of an organization's subculture, helping new workers understand not just the formal rules, but the informal norms and expectations. As Yogi Berra supposedly noted, you can observe a lot just by looking. The benefits of training are not shared equally across the workforce. Training opportunities are more prominent among college graduates. Ascribed characteristics also affect access to training. Race plays a role. As a group, white employees get more training than African American and Latina employees do. Age matters. Mid-career employees get more training than younger and older workers do, and gender affects access to informal training as well. Mentorship, a relation through which experienced staff members help lower-level employees develop their skills and abilities, tends to be confined to parties of the same sex. Cross-gender mentoring relationships are not unknown, but an unfortunate fact of organizational life that a sexual relationship often is inferred when an upper echelon male employee serves as a mentor to a lower-level female employee. This limits mentoring opportunities for women in male-dominated fields. Training shows mixed effects when it comes to improving employment prospects and wages. Some training programs result in modest rises in average earnings for participants, but they often do little to improve wages for new workers entering the labor force. There are lingering effects of globalization and technology that training programs cannot easily overcome. If jobs simply do not exist in certain sectors, training workers for those non-existent jobs will not help them. It's often a case of getting what you pay for when evaluating training programs. Most government-sponsored training programs have been low-budget operation, while public subsidies of university education serving middle and upper middle class families have been far more costly per student. Training programs work best when they're directly tied to a job. The most successful programs have been those that guarantee employment upon completion or that occur while people are already employed. Most kinds of work require sustained interaction with other workers. Sometimes these interactions are intense. Work interactions may be a source of stress. Dealing with difficult coworkers or demanding supervisors can make work less pleasant. But work is often a prime site for socialization and forming meaningful relationships. For many people, their closest friendships are formed at work, and workplace socializing is an important source of satisfaction and meaning in their lives. The quality of social interactions at work may make the difference between a job that feels rewarding and meaningful and one that feels isolating and draining. Modern society has put work at the forefront of social interaction in ways that differ significantly from the past. To some extent, the workplace is replacing families, neighborhoods, and public spaces as sources of social interaction for many people. In the 21st century industrial and post-industrial societies, extended families, neighborhoods, and public spaces no longer serve as the primary basis for social interaction the way they once did. Extended families are often geographically dispersed. People may not know their neighbors well. Public spaces are less central to social life than they were in early eras. The demands of working life may themselves undercut the ability to maintain and extend friendships away from the job. Long working hours, commutes, and work-related stress leave less time and energy for socializing outside of work. Differences in work schedules also undermine social relationships. People who work at times other than the normal workday have fewer opportunities to interact with others on typical schedules. In partial compensation, many workplaces contain ample numbers of potential friends, and collective work can be the basis for socializing while getting work done. There is a clear relationship between social relationships at work and job performance. This was demonstrated more than 80 years ago in the famous Hawthorne studies conducted at Western Electric's plant near Chicago. The Hawthorne effect refers to the tendency of workers to improve their performance when they're being observed and their efforts are appreciated. But the research discovered something even more important. Workplace friendships and social ties powerfully affect worker behavior. In the bank wiring room, workers informally set per worker output at 6,600 connections per day. Workers capable of doing more ran the risk of being sanctioned as rate busters, those doing more than required and making others look bad. Workers who failed to meet the group norm were branded as chiselers, working below the norm and not pulling their weight. There was also a strong group sentiment that workers should never tell a supervisor anything that could cause problems for fellow workers. The work group regulated the pace of work and interactions with supervisors. To understand how the workplace really functioned, researchers had to recognize the significance of work groups and how these groups influenced behavior. Job satisfaction is not only driven by pay. Yes, the need for wage or salary compels us to work and influences how hard we work. But it's not our only motivation for spending a significant portion of our lives at workplaces. As economist sociologist Thorstein Veblen noted more than a century ago, human behavior also strongly influenced by what he called the instinct of workmanship. For Veblen, working is instinctual and necessary. The absence of that instinct would result in a swift demise of the human race. Humans need to work, not just for material survival, but for psychological well-being. Work could not be a random process to be the source of personal gratification. Work had to be done purposefully. It must entail efficient use of the means at hand and adequate management of the resources available for the purposes of life itself. Work is satisfying when it's purposeful and when we can see what we're doing, that we're doing it well. Much of Veblen's discontent with early 20th century American society lay in his conviction that capitalism promoted waste and inefficiency, along with a division of society between workers and a small parasitic leisure class engaged in conspicuous consumption. Later generations of sociologists and psychologists have been less concerned with efficiency and socioeconomic divisions. Following ideas of Maslow, much interest has centered on the primary psychological functions of work. In Maslow's schema, Humans have a hierarchy of needs. When one set of needs is satisfied, people move on to the needs of another order, a higher order. At the base are things necessary for survival of individuals and species: food and sex. When these are satisfied, humans need to move in ascending order towards safety, affiliation with others, and the esteem that comes from recognition and appreciation granted by others. At the summit of the hierarchy of human needs is what Maslow labeled self-actualization, the process of developing and using one's potential to the fullest extent. Self-actualization through work is seen to be at the top of the hierarchy of human needs. For many people, work provides the primary opportunity to achieve their full potential and become everything they are capable of becoming. Maslow's approach has been quite influential, but has also faced several critiques. First, individual motivations can be hard to discern, even for the actors themselves. All of us have wondered what caused us to do something we did. People aren't always aware of their true motivations and may rationalize their behavior in terms of higher needs when more basic motivations are actually at work. Second, questions have been raised concerning the presumed universality of Maslow's schema. Self-actualization seems more appropriate to cultures putting high premiums on individualism and personal growth. This was the culture of early Protestantism, which linked successful work life to spiritual salvation. But people in more collectively oriented cultures might consider affiliation with others more important than individual achievement and fulfillment. Third, Maslow's hierarchical ordering detaches mental states from social context. How does one know when they've achieved self-actualization? It may be purely internal, but in many cases, recognition and respect conferred by one's reference group may be the surest indicator that one has achieved full potential. Finally, regarding workplace and individual life, it is essential that a job serve as the primary source of self-actualization. The instrumental approach to work suggests that for some people, work might happily be done as purely instrumental activity that pays bills while they seek to realize their full potential as fly fishermen, softball players, or poodle breeders. Work need not be the only source of self-actualization. Today, we've explored the positive aspects of work life, from the fundamental importance of simply being employed to the various forms employment takes, to work as a site for learning and social interaction, and finally to work's potential for providing intrinsic satisfaction and self-actualization. We've seen that employment provides not only financial resources, but psychological benefits, social connections, skill development, and potential sources of meaning and identity. The workplace can serve as school, social club, and a site for personal fulfillment. However, as I mentioned at the beginning, work can also be a source of misery, stress, and dissatisfaction. Not all jobs provide the benefits we've discussed. In our next chapter, we'll examine the darker side of working life, the conditions that make work unpleasant, alienating, or even dangerous. As you think about your future careers, consider not just the salary, but the social environment, opportunities for learning and growth, and potential for meaningful work that aligns with your values and goals. The best jobs provide not just adequate compensation, but the intrinsic rewards we have discussed today.